A story that sounds fake. Honestly, if I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. The truth is, back in middle school, I was planning to die. I was being brutally bullied, the teachers pretended not to see it, and my parents, both having affairs, had no interest in me. My body was covered in bruises, my face swollen from beatings, and even breathing felt painful that day. In the countryside where I lived, there was one of those classic forbidden places, a spot where even delinquents wouldn't dare enter. Looking back now, I think it was truly a place no one should have ever set foot in. I slipped past the rope barriers, not exactly ropes, but more like strange bundles of paper strips tied together, then walked down an overgrown, pathless area until I reached a small clearing. Despite my intention to die, I hadn't brought a rope or a knife. All I had was my school bag, covered in graffiti and slashed up, filled with equally ruined textbooks. I didn't know what to do, so I just leaned against a tree and fell asleep right there. Maybe it was just me, but I hadn't been able to sleep for a long time. My body hurt all over, my mind was exhausted, and I knew I needed to rest, but I couldn't. If I fell asleep, the next day would come. If I stayed home from school, one of my parents would bring their lover over and treat me like an unwanted obstacle. Sometimes they would even kick or hit me. Maybe I just didn't care anymore, or maybe my body had finally reached its limit. Either way, I passed out almost immediately. Then, I heard something, like the murmuring of voices, just like when I was at school. The bullying I endured involved everything: being ignored, physical violence, and slander. During breaks, I would always just put my head down on my desk and try to endure it, but I could still hear it. The insults. Even when the conversations weren't directed at me, I could hear them talking about me. And now, just like at school, I could hear whispers. But strangely, they weren't the usual, specific insults like gross, you should just die, you stink, or bringing up my past failures. I could tell it was bad-mouthing, but it was different. I heard things like, "What is that?" or "What's going on?" The tone was disturbed, uneasy. The way they spoke made it clear it was something unpleasant, but it was more like confusion than outright hostility. I thought it was just a dream. Even after finally managing to fall asleep, I had to suffer in my dreams too? That thought overwhelmed me, and I started crying. Loudly. My ears rang, my vision went black, and my whole body trembled. I screamed and sobbed until I lost consciousness. When I came to, I had been found, not by just anyone, but by 3 people. I hadn't told a single soul about going to that place, yet I was discovered by an old woman, someone well known as a powerful figure in the area, along with 2 people I didn't recognize, but who seemed to be related to her. As it turned out, the grandson of this old woman was one of my bullies. That's why no one had ever stood up for me. But now, the old woman took me in and immediately dragged me to her grandson. I didn't even want to see his face. Yet, standing in front of me, this guy, who had always acted like he feared nothing, was trembling. He looked absolutely terrified. Then, to my shock, he dropped to his knees and apologized. Somehow, my parents were contacted as well, and due to the stress and injuries I had endured, I ended up being hospitalized for a while. By the time I was discharged, everything had changed. The kids who bullied me, the teachers, even the principal, came to apologize to me. I had no idea why. Even my parents got on their knees and begged for forgiveness. I couldn't understand it at all. Then, I was called to the old woman's house. It turns out she was considered a powerful figure in the community because she had a kind of gift, something like spirit communication or prophecy. Apparently, it was a power that had been passed down in her family for generations, and she received transmissions from something in that forest, images and voices appearing in her mind. It was unpredictable, filled with both trivial and important messages. And at the very moment I collapsed in the forest, she had received a vision. She saw everything, the abuse I had suffered at home and at school, and then, she saw me lying unconscious in the woods. As much as it sounded unbelievable, I had no choice but to believe it. After all, I had told no one where I was going. Yet she knew everything. And apparently, she had been furious. But something like this was not supposed to happen. Anyone who entered that forest was supposed to either lose their mind or die. No one was supposed to leave with their sanity intact. Then she told me why I had been called there. It wasn't just her idea, someone in the forest had left me a message. With a wry smile, the old woman conveyed the words she had received. My full name's voice is deeply unpleasant. Never come here again. There won't be a next time. You are disgusting. Yes, she said, it explicitly included disgusting. According to her, my voice had some kind of effect on beings that weren't human, especially those without a physical form. When I had screamed and cried, I had drained it so much that it became physically unwell. From that day forward, I never went near the forest again. But after that, people, including my parents, started treating me like I was something untouchable. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and when I graduated middle school, I fled to the city. I found work, got married, and had a child. Years later, my aging parents reached out, asking for reconciliation, and after over a decade, I returned home. On the way to my parents' house, we passed by that forest. That's when my 5-year-old daughter suddenly burst into tears. She sobbed, saying, "A girl named Is or Kis, maybe some anime character?" was staring at me with a scary face in front of the forest. Not wanting to stay there a moment longer, I left my daughter with my wife at a nearby restaurant and continued on alone. After a brief, polite exchange with my still living grandmother and my parents, I promised myself I would never return to this place again. A small side note, years ago, I intentionally rented a notorious haunted apartment at an incredibly low price. For 3 days, I wandered through the room singing various songs, and suddenly, whatever presence had been there was gone. The landlord and a friend who could see things were both astonished, saying the entire atmosphere of the building had changed. I, however, have never had any sort of spiritual sensitivity. I couldn't perceive a thing. Incidentally, the house I live in now is absurdly cheap for its size and land area. I chose it deliberately. And to this day, absolutely nothing strange has ever happened. For that, I am grateful to the beings of the forest. A story that sounds fake, but every word is true. Honestly, what scared me more than the unseen was human nature itself. I hadn't changed at all, yet suddenly, everyone treated me differently. It was terrifying, like I had been tossed into an entirely different world.